It was called the War to End All Wars. What began as a regional dispute in 1914 would result in over 15 million deaths and the total dissolution of 4 global empires. In the early 1900s, Europe was held together by a tenuous balance of power. Years of imperial rivalries and a naval arms race had divided the continent into 2 opposing camps, bound by a complex web of secret alliances. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He represented an aging imperial order at odds with rising nationalist movements. On June 28, 1914, the Archduke arrived in Sarajevo, a newly annexed territory where local Serbs remained deeply resentful of Austrian rule. After an earlier bombing attempt failed, a wrong turn brought the Archduke's car directly into the path of Gavrilo Princip. The 19-year-old Serbian nationalist fired 2 pistol shots, killing both the Archduke and his wife. This localized act of terrorism acted as a detonator for the larger, long-standing rivalries of the great powers. The European powder keg was finally ignited. Blaming Serbian intelligence for the murder, Austria-Hungary delivered a list of demands designed to be rejected. When Serbia refused to surrender its sovereignty, Austria-Hungary declared war, prompting Russia to mobilize. The chain reaction was immediate. Germany declared war on Russia and France, launching a strike through neutral Belgium. Britain declared war on Germany. Within weeks, the major powers and their colonies were locked in an inescapable conflict. In August 1914, millions of soldiers marched toward the front lines. Encouraged by their leaders, many believed they would be home by Christmas. The military plans of the ruling dynasties failed to account for the speed of modern mobilization. They had launched a generation into a mechanized trap from which there was no foreseeable exit. The initial German advance was stopped at the River Marne. Faced with the lethality of modern artillery and machine guns, both armies began digging into the earth to survive. By the end of 1914, the Western Front had formed, a continuous line of trenches stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border. For the soldiers inside, life became a cycle of mud, lice, and disease. They shared their narrow earthen homes with swarms of rats and the constant stench of the dead in no man's land. Desperate to break the stalemate in Europe, the Allies opened new fronts. In 1915, they landed on the exposed shorelines of Gallipoli, but after months of fighting on the cliffs, they found only another bloody deadlock. On the Western Front, massive offensives like Verdun and the Somme saw millions of shells fired and hundreds of thousands of casualties. In months of fighting, the front lines often shifted by only a few miles. The war had reached a lethal equilibrium. Open field tactics were proving useless against the power of 20th century defensive weaponry. When ordered over the top, infantrymen scrambled out of their trenches and into the line of fire of rapid-fire machine guns, which could cut down an entire company in seconds. To bypass these defenses, Germany introduced poison gas at the Second Battle of Ypres. Chlorine and mustard gas were used to break the stalemate by choking the trenches with toxic clouds. The Allies responded with the invention of the tank. These armored beasts were designed to crush barbed wire and cross the cratered mud of no man's land while protecting the men inside. High-explosive artillery shells rained down without end, day after day, churning the one-screen battlefields into unrecognizable landscapes of blasted craters and mud. The toll on the survivors was both physical and mental. Thousands suffered from shell shock, a complete emotional collapse, while others lost limbs to the rot of trench foot caused by standing for days in freezing, polluted water. While millions of young men were systematically pulverized by these new machines, their senior generals remained miles away in chateaus, struggling to adapt their old strategies to this new mechanized slaughter. By 1917, the Russian Empire collapsed under the weight of the war. Mounting casualties and food shortages triggered a massive revolution, leading the new Bolshevik government to sign a peace treaty and exit the conflict. Germany seized the opportunity to move its eastern armies to the Western Front. They launched one final, massive spring offensive in 1918, hoping to win the war before the Allies could be reinforced. Germany took a final gamble by resuming unrestricted submarine warfare against Atlantic shipping. This provocation, alongside the interception of a telegram proposing a German-Mexican alliance, ended American neutrality. Hundreds of thousands of fresh American troops began arriving in France. Their numbers allowed the Allies to halt the advance and launch a decisive counteroffensive. The German military was exhausted, and its civilians were starving under a relentless British naval blockade that had cut off all essential supplies. With the front line collapsing and revolution spreading at home, the German High Command surrendered. The abdication of the Kaiser marked the sudden end of the German Empire. The war did not end with a single tactical victory. It ended because the economic and social systems of the Central Powers had completely collapsed. The fighting officially stopped at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918. A wave of jubilation swept across the globe. In cities like New York and London, massive crowds gathered to celebrate the end of the bloodshed. At the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, the victors forced Germany to accept full responsibility for the war. The terms required Germany to surrender large territories and pay crippling financial reparations to the Allied powers. Behind the scenes, the Sykes-Picot Agreement saw Britain and France divide the territories of the former Ottoman Empire between themselves, disregarding local calls for independence. The League of Nations was created to prevent future conflicts, but it was fatally weakened when the United States Senate refused to join the organization. 4 ancient empires were entirely erased from the map. They left behind a fractured, resentful world, struggling to manage the instability of coming decades. The Great War did not make the world safe for democracy. It buried a generation in mud, demonstrated the capacity for industrialized slaughter, and set a ticking clock for a second, deadlier global conflict.